and your lovely cohort today. I'm very grateful to be here. This is my first time talking to your chapter, and Maryland is my home state. So it's nice to actually be with you from Maryland as we celebrate the NDE and what it teaches us all. I'm very grateful also to have the health and the vitality and the blessings that have come forth since walking back into this earth walk to be present in this particular home. Where I am sitting is actually my parents' house. I've never told this story from this house, yet what's so important is it all began in Maryland, and this is the home that I fell into coma in. So for the past week, I've been sleeping in that bed and really receiving a lot of interesting messages. So it's also going to be both fun and also alchemy and some sort of healing medicine for me to intuitively share this story from this particular place. Per your knowing, I'm going to follow my team's guidance. I'm going to tell this to you unscripted, intuitively. I am a conscious, intuitive channel. So all the time, Spirit's giving me information. I'm also seeing what's coming up in the field in my particular energy space and with the plants and the angelics that are currently here and receiving that information. So you might hear me playfully, comment to Spirit or say something of that jest as I'm receiving the information, as it makes it easier for me to filter. Quite often, what my human or my ego identity, lower mind, likes to presume or assume or create an agenda with, it's not the direction my higher selves or spirit want to go in. So I have a tendency to be very vulnerable and playful about that in NDE groups because this is a safe space. And I want to honor that because, as you'll hear shortly, for 9 years, I did not talk about my NDE. And for the 29 years prior to the NDE, I did not talk about my intuitive gifts. So I just want to acknowledge that it's quite an honor for me to be in a space and in communities that can receive this information. I do want to offer, I know you all know this is an NDE story and you've heard many of them, but for those of you that might be newer experiencers, or those of you that might have had another NDE recently or another spiritually transformative experience, I do want to offer a trigger warning to my story. It does contain a lot of complex trauma. I am not sure what I'll be guided to go into tonight. Yet, I want to say that for anyone that's currently activated, if it gets to be too much, just listen to your intuition and exit. You can always perhaps circle back to this recording. Yet I want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. When I was new in the community, I would say about 2 years after my NDE, I could not even go into some of these groups without my after effects getting too activated in a way that my central nervous system could not tolerate. I became ungrounded and had a bunch of issues. I see that all the time as someone who works with mystical experiencers worldwide. So I just want to be cognizant of that. I will be drinking a ton of water. Excuse me with this. As I'm receiving and interpreting and following information, I get very dehydrated. So I apologize for that. There's a lot of energy coming in. And as you will see, at times I talk fast, at times I'll go up, down, and all around. This is the receiving of the energy. To many people, this experience itself can be healing, it can be triggering, it can be all of the above. So please drink water, ground yourself, do whatever you want to do. Once I finish the intuitive storytelling aspect of my NDE and after effects, I would love to open it up to you. I believe the questions and answering section is where much of this information comes through. I'm clearing a throat chakra block right now. It's always awesome to do this stuff live, but that's what they're doing. So we're going to go with it. So that said, here we go. Let's circle back to 2010. In this very home, I am a 29-year-old who had recently completed a very difficult graduate education experience. When I finished my MFT as a marriage and family therapist, I began to suddenly have what everyone believed was psychosomatic responses or sensitivities to my work. I would rapidly swell up. I mean, to a point you might not recognize me. We're talking about 10 to 15 pounds of inflammation in a very short period of time, a matter of days. When that would happen, my joints would lock. They would get what looked like Rainier's or something in the hands, purple, pink, blue, and they'd be swollen and I could not move them. So at this point, I've gone from being in graduate school to my doctoral program, and I'm trying to type a dissertation with hands that are locking. On top of this, I had had severe childhood asthma since I was very, very young. And those complications had led to being on high-dose prednisone for very long periods of my life. We're talking from the time I'm about 8 to when this becomes symptomatic at 25. I've done chronic rounds, I've done IVs, and I've been on a nebulizer most of my life. Okay, now the lungs are starting to go beyond asthma. I'm starting to show the markers of lung failure at 25 to 29 years old. Again, there's no medical explanation. No diseases are coming up initially on the scans. And so at that point, I'm diagnosed with what was assumed to be chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And yet, that just didn't seem to fit either. Even my pulmonologist was like, I don't know about this. The joints ought to not be involved. We both agreed it felt more autoimmune-ish. I did have a lot of stress in my life. I had gone from doing 2 masters at once, getting licensed very quickly, and then going into a doctoral program, which I worked very hard to get a merit scholarship in. That said, there were 2 summations, which were either I was stressed out by all that I was doing and I was doing too much and needed to slow down, or this was a byproduct of asthma that might have led to autoimmunity. Okay. Now, I myself was a young therapist at this time, and like many therapists, many healers, and likely many of you, being a born empath and intuitive, I had chosen to go into a healing profession. Now, my story, and I will spare you the graphic details at this point, my story wasn't pretty as a child. Suffice to say, I have wondrous parents who I've done a lot of healing work, yet they believed that if they were gone and they were working all the time, they'd be able to afford a lifestyle for my brother and I that we wouldn't otherwise had. They had both grown up in severe poverty and wanted to really offer us more. In their diligence to provide on the material plane, they trusted family. They trusted others in the home of family that perhaps they ought to not have trusted. Okay. And so I spend a large period of my youth in a very hostile environment. It was recurrent abuse by someone deeply trusted to me previously, and then someone I had to constantly be with for the next 6 years after it began. And so my body went through a lot of stress at a very young age. The asthma intensifies. I start to exhibit certain sensitivities. So I'm giving you this to contextualize the NDE, and more importantly, what comes afterwards. Because in my NDE, part of what's unique is really the reintegration and embodiment of it, as I spent so much time focused on that and now help others in that capacity. And so I go through this kind of really emotionally neglected portion of my life that starts to lead to the co-creation of physical disease. In my mind, even at a very young age, I started to see patterns long before I was licensed as a clinician or even trained in clinical psychology. I started to see patterns where when I was forced to suppress what was going on, as I was an outlier in the abuse circles of how Families pathologize this dysfunction. Many children will never self-disclose because they just don't feel that if they disclose, they will be heard. I took a chance. I did disclose. Unfortunately, I was not heard. Unfortunately, the persons around, I was in a parochial school, so it was predominantly priests and nuns. They, unfortunately, in this institution, I understand they do not do this in all, but in this particular institution, they somewhat normalized what had happened, told me to go basically pray for help, and that was it. They didn't seem to care that I was continually going back into this home, and I wasn't being heard by the adults that I told. And so I started to internalize a schema. What we call in psychology is a schema. Anything you tell yourself over and over and over. So if this thing keeps happening and I'm powerless, because you learn at a certain point that you can't fight certain things off without getting more hurt. If I'm powerless to protect myself, then I'm bad, because this just keeps happening to me over and over and over again. So I must be bad. My body must be disgusting. Something is wrong with me. This is what children will do to protect the other persons in their environment that aren't protecting them. They will actually split and turn against the self. Okay. And so this is what begins happening in my mind. At the very same time, because no one is protecting me, I intuitively begin to become a fierce protector of anyone else being hurt. Okay. So anyone marginalized, anyone treated poorly, I suddenly feel this is my superpower. I can help them because my intuition and ability to sense it as a victim myself at that time was heightened. Okay. For that reason, perhaps I was guided gently into psychology. And it was at that time that the disease had begun presenting itself. And it was at that time, long before mind-body medicine is what we now know. Because again, we're talking 2006 to 2010, before the diagnoses that leads to my NDE. At that time, they couldn't hear what I wanted to tell them. And that is this. I would go into a doctor's office and I would tell them I had years of recurrent trauma. It impacted this, this, and this. I've never felt that talking helped it, which is very common with abuse survivors. We often get reactivated by talking about the details. But again, this wasn't understood at the time. I said, I feel that when I've talked about it in therapy, it's made it worse, and that my body is trying to serve as some sort of buffer. I wish I could tell you that it wasn't consistent, but unfortunately it was. Every doctor I told this to during that 4-year period either overtly laughed at me or told me I was overthinking, that the body would not conflate all of these dramatic presentations, that my kidneys wouldn't suddenly be involved when I'm only 25 to 29 years old if there wasn't a physical etiology, a root. Okay. So what leads to NDE is I end up coming back to Maryland. I feel that every diagnosis I've received in California just doesn't fit. And on top of it not fitting, they keep changing the vernacular. 1 minute, the nomenclature is lupus. 1 minute, it's rheumatoid arthritis. Next minute, it's, what was the one with the copper? It's some allergy to copper. There was another one that they want to say Wilson's disease. And they say it's Wilson's disease. Each time they're running all these dramatic tests, each time I'm being hospitalized, not one time does the medical protocol actually stop the flare-up. Okay. Now, simultaneously, I'm doing all the therapeutic work that I feel will assist with trauma, but the body just keeps producing this narrative of physical disease. And so, knowing that my parents were in Western Maryland and I had a lot of family in Baltimore, I knew Johns Hopkins had the leading research autoimmune center. And I knew that every doctor was saying the only pathology that makes sense is autoimmunity. I also knew the beginning of pioneering autoimmune research and trauma at that time, which was really not in the mainstream, but I had the privilege of accessing it through my education. And so I knew autoimmunity and trauma probably had a common crossroads in their etiology. And if that's true, Hopkins might be the place that I go to land and be fully received and evaluated and heard. And so my NDE really begins right here in this home. I've had all of these symptoms flare up. I'm waiting for the appointment at Hopkins. I had 2 days until the appointment, but I'm down in this bottom floor apartment that my parents have in this home.
I can't hear you because it's coming through my hearing.
Can you hear now? Hi, can you hear?
I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yes, I can hear.
Okay, sorry, it came through that you couldn't. Okay, so I'm waiting for this appointment. I'm in the bottom floor area, and suddenly everything starts locking to where I can't get up the stairs to get to like food and water. And my family happens to be on a cruise that isn't coming home. So I call till my appointment, which was 2 days away. So I call the doctors and I say to them, like, I'm completely locked up. I don't go to the doctors for 2 days. What can I do? And they tell me, with no hesitancy, and we're talking about 4 different specialists here, to take a double dose of the medication because of the pain, because of the inflammation, and that it will do no harm. Well, here's where medical error becomes the pathway to my NDE. It would have done no harm to a healthy person, to someone whose liver was not already failing. In all of those tests that they took, no one had ever caught on or deduced or even questioned that the liver might be involved. And so the advice to take an extra product or 2 that had Tylenol in it ended up putting me into coma. Basically, I take the double doses of the 2 medications. My lungs and my kidneys are already failing. That had been determined by the test. We knew that. We did not know about the liver. So I take the medication. I may have been standing up. I don't know. I don't remember going unconscious. I remember everything that happens in ICU, which we will soon deep dive into. Yet I take the medication. Next thing I know, I'm seeing the body outside from above. Yet I'm going to give you just an overview before we get into the beauty of the NDE so that you can feel the contrast as we juxtapose between these journeys. And so from what I know from medical records, from what I know from my family's storytelling, which varies person to person, and then what I know from the medical trauma that occurred, it appears that when I took the medication that compromised the liver beyond its ability to bounce back, I collapsed. And the medicine basically worked so quickly once it passed through the body that it took the livers and the lungs, and the kidneys with it. Because I hit my head somehow by falling, there was also a traumatic brain injury. I was not unconscious at that time. It was a TBI, though, from the trauma, the blunt trauma to the head. When my parents come back, they find me swollen, like I described about before, where it looks like 15 pounds or so. I'm jaundiced head to toe. I'm purple and you bruise all over when the liver starts to fail that rapidly. And so they called 911. I was taken to a local hospital. The minute they saw the severity and that I was affiliated with Hopkins, they helicoptered me to Hopkins. And now that you have that backstory, yet I want you to understand it for what's coming forward, is when my beautiful, ineffable NDE happens. Talk about contrast. It's so difficult to find a spectrum of human language that will ever come close to the cosmic kiss that awaits us when we finally transcend this form and reunify with the higher aspects of self, the eternal oversoul, and most importantly, our creator. Whatever language, whatever intimacy, whatever knowing, whatever traditions you affiliate with that. For me, given the traumas I've highlighted yet not deep dove into, it was a very difficult experience being human. There wasn't much prior to a very young age that was comfortable, that was welcoming, that was nurturing. And so when I transcend the body, it's rather rapid with one minute detail. I did see the body from above right before I was fully pulled in to the cosmic kiss. And I saw it. And what's interesting, and when I say I, again, I do mean the higher selves, the eternal part of the bigger I, not the little I. But the I, the little I, was also somehow still dancing with it. They were still connected. The personality, the Brooke that's here now, that way of being was there, yet it wasn't navigating the show. And what I mean by that is when I'm looking down in ICU and I can see everybody working on me. And again, I had triple organ failure, traumatic brain injury, and I was comatose at this point. They also they declared me likely brain dead very quickly after being admitted to ICU. There wasn't a lot of hope they were going to save that person on the table. And when I saw it, it was more of a curiosity. Like you're looking above and it's like, whoa, what are all those people doing in hazmat suits? What are they working on? Why are they dressed like that? This was before the pandemic and quarantine, and they were wearing all of this hazmat like stuff. And my mind, or the lower mind that was still with me at that time, was questioning all that. And then there was this recognition of, oh my goodness, that's me. And in that moment, because I haven't transcended into the ineffable cosmic kiss, there was attachment. There was ego. There was like a willing to protect my body because of the association. It was part of me. And it was in that moment that they just like teleported me, like pulled so super, super, super fast. There was no in between. It was like earth and there. And this space, I've described it so many times, and yet I feel I've failed to describe it accurately in all of these times. It was nothing like this earth walk. It was a place of sublime darkness that had dancing through it the most luminous, effervescent, holding, unconditionally loving, and judgment-free angelics. I would call them myself soul fam, but you can put whatever vernacular you want on it. Others might say ancestors. Others might say loved ones. For me, form doesn't come into it so much in this space because they didn't present to me in a form recognizable on earth. What they did use, a language they supported me in, was a sort of homecoming. I had been an intuitive child, and from the age of 3 to about probably 13, when I started suppressing it with all the other things that were occurring, I had talked about angelics. I had talked about interactions with other realms and this belief in this totally benevolent creator that loves everything and was beyond the religion I had been indoctrinated with, which was very patriarchal, which was very about power and control. And to me as a young person, not so much unconditional love. And so I talked about those things, and they had gotten me vilified and attacked and called a witch and, you know, all this horrible stuff because my family just was very close-minded. And this isn't so much my parents, but the persons who were raising me when they were gone, which had a bigger role at that time on my life. And so again, home wasn't something that really felt safe. And suddenly the same colored hues, which had showed themselves to me as a child, which were this beautiful ruby red, this beautiful amethyst purple, and this beautiful emerald green light, as well as a beautiful sapphire-like color, which was not as atop of me in my consciousness form as these other ones were, but it was there and it was present. And those lights had been what I described to my parents. I always called them my angel jewels, or, you know, my star angels. And my parents always thought I was just making this up. But when I get into this space and the consciousness is still suddenly kind of recalibrating as it's back into the eternal. It's back into, frequencies that our human mind is not acclimated to on earth, things that we don't necessarily pick up. I recognized them and they really held space for me. And there still was enough awareness. Now, please remember, I may have been declared potentially brain dead, yet I was still obviously cognitively somewhat intact as I came back this way. Yet I was in between. They didn't declare me dead. They gave me a 1% chance of survival. Now I spend the entirety of that 1% chance of survival in this realm or the heavens or the cosmos, however you choose to perceive it, for 3.5 days. Okay. When I wake, I would later say that I thought I was gone 3 years. I sincerely did. There's no time over there. And so getting back to something with linearly oriented time was very dysregulating to the system. Yet I was there 3 days. And so these wondrous, luminous beings that I have known since childhood just immerse me in this just light tapestry of intelligence, of peace, of bliss. And it's as if when I'm being filled and renewed and introduced and invited into these other orbs of light, each time, whatever connection, whatever intimacy I still had with Brooke as I knew her, or that body on the table, just dissolved and dissolved. It was effortless. It was spontaneous. It was organic. And so no identity is truly with me as I'm receiving this love. Again, it's as if it's washing it all away, as if all the mud the lotus encountered is gone. And I'm perfectly content from that light intelligence space, this cosmic heart that I'm now part of, to just be with the angels that had greeted me. And yet, at the same time as I really bask in their bliss and am received and truly feel the grace of being received, this other frequency begins to pull. And this other frequency is magnetic. It's as if, you see your friends all the time, perhaps that live in your neighborhood or down the street or near your grocery store, and you sometimes take for granted how often you see them, right? That's kind of how the angels were to me. I'm like, oh, they're real in my higher self consciousness. And at the same time, but I know you guys, that's fun. Whereas this other frequency is when, like, perhaps a friend you haven't seen in years, you suddenly bounce into them and it's like magnetic and you forget the palpable energy and exchange and chemistry between you. It's like this other light had that kind of pull. It was big, it was powerful, it was calling, it was beckoning. And so I began to become enchanted by that light. I began to want to know that light. And at the same time, knowings are coming through me, and that's the best. I wish I could give you a better description. I really don't like the term download because it's been so associated with earth-based practices, and they're not always ethically integral and aligned and operating at the highest and best. But it really was an instantaneous knowing of something. And in that moment, the angelics would pass through me, or I would pass through other lights in the space, and there would just be spontaneous information. Light is information. So as each type of this intelligence is dancing together in this space, new information is being received, but it's like instantaneous. Like whereas on Earth, you process it and then you're thinking about it and then you're starting to integrate and then you're embodying. That was not the case there. It was just an instantaneous knowing. Okay. And so from there, I received this information. I started to be kind of curious about it. Perhaps that was what my soul needed, was to receive that particular information, because as I'm getting pulled towards this magnetic light of pure bliss and love that just seems to be calling and magnetizing me towards it, I'm also really curious about these images that they're showing to me. And one of the images I share this with you guys now, but if you look back to like 2019 when I first started talking about my NDE publicly, which I thought I would do once, and yet here we are, that in that talk, I kind of don't go over at all the talks in the beginning. I didn't go into this, and it was mostly because this stuff hadn't come into fruition, and I really thought it was personal, like spirit had shown it to me strictly for me. It wasn't until 2020 I started to understand that these images that they were showing me were extremely important for the collective. It's a huge part of why I started sharing more and more after 2020. And so basically, one of these images was the Earth. And the Earth looked very different than it does now when we see pictures of it from outer space. And from this particular view, it was as if I was in that same void of darkness, but again, illuminated by all the stars. The Earth was just glowing in this, for lack of better terms, holy way. Like when we see the aura of Christ or we see the aura of Buddha, that soul star chakra illuminated, this is what the Earth seemed to have. But more importantly, for this particular part of the story, the Earth had all of these other beings around it, and they weren't form like humans, they weren't humanoid or form, but there was something that almost felt like hands going like this, and this beautiful citrine like light emanating, but they were all connected, like each set of hands were connecting all the way around the Earth. And what the knowing of that particular image was, and it still gives me angel chills whenever I receive it, was that the Earth had an opportunity to completely change its vibration, its frequency, its light, its emission to the cosmos, to the galaxies. And it would come through human connection. And that's really how it felt and was received to me, that there would be people that would come together and change the Earth. And again, there wasn't like you're going or they're going or you're there to help. It wasn't like that. It wasn't grandiose in any way. But to my soul, that awakened some sort of blueprint, even in that space, or perhaps why I chose such a difficult incarnation here and now. All I know is that when that particular image came through, all of a sudden, as much as I was going towards that bright, more violet flame, light-like, because it was very bright white, but towards the ends, it would be kind of purple and violet, and very electric, just constantly in movement. Everything in that space was in movement, but in a very soft, gentle, poetic way. Suddenly, I didn't feel I wanted to go there, not with the intensity I'd had before. I still wanted to be one with it. I wanted to know it. I wanted to return to it, but it didn't have the immediacy. There wasn't this right now, right now, right now. And my own light body in that space sort of stopped. And whether it was intuitively or by myself just stopping in that body or that formless body space, the angelics then let it be known to me, you are of that light. And again, they don't speak in words, it's frequency and vibration and light in my experience. And so you are part of that light. You will return to that light. All is part of that light. All returns from that light. All is made of that light. And so they sort of confirmed in a very gentle way that I didn't need to rush to it, that I could taste it. And I really could from where I was at, that I could be filled with it, that I could be nourished with it. And later I learned that you could transmit it when you spend time with it in that space. And so I just stayed there in this in-between for what felt like years, but apparently might have been a day or two. And there was just so much rapid quantum light healing that occurred in that space. And they would have not used that term. It was just literally being in the space of the divine. It was undoing all of the nodding and the cording and the energies and the stories and the myths and the karmas and the dramas and the hungry ghosts and the pathologies and all of the things that had defined humanity for me in this incarnation and potentially in many others. And so I just allowed myself to receive that and to really be open to it in that space. And then it felt like very quickly from there, I was given a choice. And this is unique to my story and many others, but not everyone. It's very personal to each NDE story. Yet I was given the choice in that space. Do you wish to return? And because of that image of the earth and the light and the knowing that somehow I was part of that circle, and that circle would make sense of what happened before. And they did not say this, okay? This was what was sort of download or reactivated in my own consciousness. There was just an intuitive certainty, an absolute, that if I went back, I could be part of something that I might have originally come here for. And that call was so loud to my oversoul that it was worth returning. And so I say to my angelics and my soul fam that's with me, how do I get back? I don't have a body. I don't know how to get back to the body. Everywhere I look in different directions. All you had to do is receive any other area of this cosmos-like space and you'd be there. It was like instantaneous, like you were traveling at the speed of light. And yet I couldn't fathom how to get out of this space. And so I then just really asked for a clue or some guidance. And that's when my angelics gave me a little bit of play and some teasing, which they still do in this realm to this day. But they basically said to me in light terms, look for the light unlike the others. Okay. So at that point, my consciousness sees these two other lights. And whereas the angelics had been nowhere near the frequency of the creator or the God light, they were potent. And yet these other two lights were kind of cute and they were small and they were not nearly as big or bright or communicative. And with the other lights, I always felt like they were holding my light, like they were supporting me and holding me in unconditionality. But with these lights, I didn't feel that. And I felt like I wanted to hold them. Well, I attempted to communicate with them, but nothing came through. So I thought, okay, whatever. And I didn't take much heart to it. And it's not until many years later, when I have my children, who I was told I could not have per coma, that I realize when they're born that each of the auras matches the child that had greeted me on the way back to the body. And we may discuss that a little bit more because my intuitive son, it's a hoot to hear those stories. But that said, they kind of greet me as I then see a horrific, artificial, blinding, very human, very earth, very hospital light. And it is then that I'm catapulted from this loving space of unconditional positive regard, no judgment, no really even processing, in my case, of a life review and those kind of critiques, just an allowance of being pure love, being received by pure love, being here to help create pure love on this earth plane. And then suddenly I'm catapulted back into this human vehicle. And unfortunately, my human vehicle was very, very injured. And so I have this crash landing from this beautiful space into a very traumatized body that was on the brink of death. Now, because I was declared likely brain dead and my lungs had failed, I had 2 PICC lines going into my brain. They had told my family that if I were to wake, I'd likely be a vegetable with no cognition. And so, blessedly, my ex-husband chose to put PICC lines into the brain. Those, with the assistance of the angels and my teams, likely saved my cognition. However, I had to remain intubated for the next 3 days after awakening. And here's where it gets extra difficult. I'm catapulted back into the body. I'm intubated. I have these PICC lines. I'm therefore strapped down to the bed, unable to move. I'm blinking my eyes rapidly. Where am I? I can't see anything. Very quickly realize I don't have contacts in. Then suddenly it's like, I don't have contacts in, but everything's moving. Why is everything discolored? I can feel the intubator. I know I can't move. little bit of panic's coming on, but the psychologist in me is telling me to stay calm, stay grounded, don't get your vitals going. And then I'm like, to my rational mind, which is suddenly back online after all this time, is like, it's drugs. They gave you medicine. This is a hospital. You don't know what happened. Stay calm. And then they'll come explain everything to you. Well, when you're declared likely brain dead and you've been having involuntary eye muscle movements and, flutters and all the things that happen when you're comatose, if they don't notice you wake up, guess what? They don't know you're back in there. And so I sit in this hospital bed thinking at some point someone's just going to know I'm up because of the change in my vitals or whatnot. Nothing is happening. At the same time, I cannot understand why I'm seeing all this weird stuff moving around everything. But because my contacts aren't in, I keep telling myself it's medication or some side effect to whatever happened to me that I don't know what it was. I knew I was very sick, but there was no reason I should be strapped down, like that. And so I decide I'm going to stay cool and I'm going to think about that weird dream I just had. And of course, my brain's coming on like, oh yeah, that was totally a dream, right away. The science oriented part of me starts attempting to normalize what just happened, make sense of it, or throw it away. Okay. And yet some other part of me from the belly down is like, that was something. That was something important. You're not throwing that out. That was something. And so there's immediately a tug of war between my very earth-based qualities and the ones that have opened up from spirit or reactivated. And so I decide to stay cool initially and that they'll figure it out and they'll come and someone will tell me what had happened and blah, blah, blah. Nobody shows up. No idea how long exactly that was because they never totally took accountability for that. The first note I've read in my medical records is at least 72 hours after I was probably sitting there having machines do everything. A lot occurs. And the reason I want to acknowledge this is if you're very logical and analytical, like I was at that time and still am in some ways, that masculine sense of the brain will immediately come on and kind of try to talk down the intuitive, largely because we live in a world that does that. Okay. We are, garbage in, garbage out. If society tells us to be a certain way, most of us adapt to be that way to function in society. Okay. And this is why my after effects, which were beginning to introduce themselves in this space of the story, were very concerning to my brain. The brain and the mind's job are to protect you, and they use old stories to do it. And so the mind's telling me all of this was nonsense. You know what religion did to you. Trauma, trauma, trauma. Don't even think any of that was real. Let's just get someone to come help you and move on. At the same token, intuitively, I'm noticing that when my energy shifts, when my thoughts and feelings shift, suddenly all the lights and stuff around me behave differently. I can't move much, but I can move my hands and notice that if I think and feel different things, the energy surrounding them, I wouldn't have called it energy, but the colors surrounding them start to change. So immediately, even the mind's getting a tested fit in this space because the things that the mind thinks are bogus, I'm testing and finding validity with. Now, for me as a psychotherapist, and I was licensed at that time already, I want to make sure that all of these things that I'm thinking and feeling while I'm in this space of kind of being alone again, but with no angelic support, or so I thought, that I'm not losing it mentally. Because I don't know what's gone on here. What if my mind's just playing tricks on me? Maybe it's not drugs. Maybe I've had a breakdown. Oh my gosh, what could have happened? So I start running what's called a mental status exam on myself. I keep making sure I'm oriented to person, time, place, situation. These are the clinical things that they are always looking for to make sure you're not having a psychotic break or a drug-induced break or whatever. I'm running the mental status exam inside of my head over and over, and I'm oriented ×4, and I'm cognizant enough to know it. So at that point, something has to be medically happening with me. Well, when you're in a space where you can't talk to anyone for a while, They don't know you're in there. You don't know what happened to you at all. And you've had this experience that your mind is totally saying no to, but some other part of your being, and now what you're seeing, your actual sight, is saying yes to. What do? Well, if you're like me and you're a creative person and you're also very science oriented, you're going to experiment. And so I just then decided it's worth a shot. The higher selves of my being now have a bigger doorway. They come through a bit. You knew those beings on the other side. Call to them now. What's it going to hurt? What's it going to hurt? Trigger your ego a little bit, but it's not going to hurt you to actually do it. And so I really say to them, part of me believes that you are real, and another part of me is deeply struggling with it. I do not know what's happened to me. Obviously, something is deeply wrong with my body. I'm scared. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And like fireworks, all of those beautiful, beatific, and just serendipitous light beings are in the room. Now, when ICU calls code red, code blue, which they were doing the whole time I'm locked in my body and no one knows, now everything's shifting. Whereas before, when I would hear it and I would panic because I knew someone was transitioning and I had to feel and see all of that again, suddenly it's as if the frequency I was receiving it from has been changed. No longer am I taking it in through this kind of egoic, woe is me, I'm a victim of this. Suddenly I'm up here and it's like, wow, look at that person across from me. I don't know what that is. I now understand that it was their teams, that it was their ancestors, that it's their light beings, but there was a transition team arriving. And suddenly it was like, that's not scary. That's beautiful. I had my very first shared death experiences in that ICU, the days I was locked in, unable to communicate. And it was my angelic support teams that just really intuitively guided me through it. Same as what ultimately allows me to achieve spontaneous remission, insofar as once they actually got me off the PICC lines, they were still in, but they weren't attached. I didn't have to be strapped down. Once they did that, I was able to then move my hands. And it was in that space, sleeping at night, where I would just feel intuitive movements come through. And at first it would just be running energy very freely and without any kind of attention to outcome, or yes, an agenda. They're correcting me, an agenda. And so I would just be running the energy, and then intuitively I'd be led to hold. And from a distance, I did not like doing it on top because of the inflammation, but from a close distance, doing what looks much like Reiki, doing energy healing on the body. But as I would do it, there would be a co-occurring sort of psychic surgery that was really led by the divine, led by the angelics. I was nothing more than a conduit for their energies. And so when they would leave at night, I would sit there when I didn't have staff around me all night. I was scared I was going to look crazy. I was already seeing things. I was already terrified to tell people I was seeing things. I now understand it was the quantum field. It was energy. It was the ability to see both the energy signature of living beings, but also the energy signature of what we deem to just be material, because all of it is light. All of it is moving. It is briefly presenting to us because of our brains at present as this physical form, but truthfully, it's all emotion. And so seeing that intensity, these things move at a rapid speed, not knowing what had happened to me, knowing I was with my family where there was a heavy trauma history and we hadn't done the kind of healing work we have now, 13 years later. I was very scared to let the world know I'd had this experience, that I was seeing the stuff I didn't understand, that it was some sort of medical error and not my fault. Because upon awakening, unfortunately, and this is what led to the current work that I do now, in addition to not being able to trust a licensed psychologist at that time, psychology, big ups to them in the fact that they've changed a lot in recent years, but there's so much work to do. When I went through this experience, transpersonal psychology could get no accreditation. Nobody really took those type of programs. I later went into it post NDE, but at the time, that's just not the track people were going. And so I didn't know where to find a clinician I could talk to this about without being pathologized. I didn't know where to find a therapist at that time in 2010. And in the clinical nomenclature I was trained in, we didn't listen to this kind of stuff. If you talked about this, I was trained to diagnose you as schizoaffective disorder at best. If you were really floored and really activated, it might go into a deeper psychotic disorder. And so because of that training, I'd studied psychology at this point about 11 years and had 3 or 4 degrees at that point already in it. Because of that training, my brain, the lower mind, the ego that had gone to school for that long and was defending a PhD in that field, they didn't want to let go of their identities. Okay. And I say they because we all have multitudes of parts that are in these stories or these energies or these fragments of our bigger personality. Okay. And so for me, very quickly, I start feeling the split between like human Brooke and like higher self spirit Brooke. And it all is occurring in this hospital room. And so I'm fighting my own mind. I want to get out of this environment because being in ICU when you are seeing the energetic field of everything is still very overwhelming if I can't control who's in the room, and I largely couldn't. I had other after effects coming on, like medical intuition or feeling someone's thoughts. I had this doctor who would come in and he was so doom and gloom. It's funny to me now, but it's not funny whatsoever back then. But he would come in and he would come to the edge of the bed and he would give his really negative prognosis. I was going to be in a wheelchair. If I didn't get a liver, I was dead. I was going to never have children. The organs had been too damaged. I would never become a doctor, on and on and on and on. And so I learned very early on that one thing that's fun about seeing the energy field is that you can tune out all the noise if you just pay attention to the fireworks. Well, what I didn't know is that if you tune out what someone's saying, because I had no experience, you tune out what you're saying and you just focus on the field, other aspects of your gifts might come on. And so in this particular case, he's giving me this gripe about my prognosis. And all of a sudden I hear what he's thinking. And he was craving a cigarette. And so I blurt out to him, why don't you just go have the cigarette? And he jumps like 5 feet back, like, how would I have known? He didn't smell like smoke. He didn't give off any indication on the surface, yet he was ruminating over a cigarette. And in that moment, when I saw his reaction, I'm energetically catapulted back to being that little girl who knew her grandmother was going to die 5 minutes before and said something and then was a witch. You know, so for me, these kind of after effects are instantly met with shame because my child gifts were met with shame because they were told they were bad. So that's why that schema I introduced to you in the beginning is really important, because even though I've gone from this poetry of ineffable bliss, I'm now back on this very 3D, very painful, very traumatic earth walk. And so in the body, here and now, I'm doing all of this healing, but I still have to step into this physical environment that's very activating over and over again. And so my family actually at the time really believed that I might have accidentally taken the medication too much. Again, they're using that young girl who was an abuse victim, whom self-medicated with substances, and they're applying that story to the 29-year-old that was a licensed therapist that had 3 degrees and was the top of her class. Unfortunately, both of them are me. Okay? So while I was very angry when I woke up that I was treated this way, now in hindsight and after doing all of the healing work, I can see how we co-created this narrative. I can see why that narrative was necessary to bringing me to this work here and now. At the time, was I happy about any of it? Absolutely not. And so when I proved to everyone I had nothing to do with it, when doctors start taking accountability, I then say to the angelics, get me out of this hospital. It was December. They'd been playing Christmas music every single day, all day when I was stuck in ICU. And that is a little bit crazy making in and of itself if you're not in the mood for Christmas music. And so I tell myself, I'm going to get out of ICU. I'm going to be in an environment I can control. I'm going to work with the light and I'm going to get fully healed. And that wasn't my ego. It was just this spiritual knowing that became illuminated through the higher selves. And so I just believed it. And I had had the privilege of working with some wonderful doctors like Dr. Bruce Lipton in my education. And he had really emphasized the biology of belief. And I'm like, if this light is real, which it seems to be because it responds to everything, I'm not clinically crazy. And I can change my consciousness and therefore co-create with the field and change the reaction between anything in contact with me, then theoretically the light and I can work together. I'm going to believe I get well, and I'm going to walk out of this hospital in like a week or two, right? Says the girl who hasn't even done occupational therapy. And yet that's exactly what happened. I worked with the light every single night. I worked with my body as much as they told me it was safe. And within, I believe, 14 days from that moment, I leave. I go from a lower level of care rapidly, a couple days apart. And then I end up getting discharged from the hospital. The doctor who had wanted the cigarette actually comes up and shakes my hand. He goes, I use this word very, very rarely. I don't even know if I've ever said it to a patient. And he's like, yet you are a miracle. There's no explanation for how you were walking out of this hospital. There's no explanation for how rapidly your liver healed. My liver count was at 240,000 when I dropped into coma. I left the hospital 3.5 weeks later or so with a liver count of 35 in the optimal range. There's no earthly explanation for that. That was divine assistance. That was God. That was creator. That was light. That was also what began my training in beginning to understand that we are all beings of light. We all come from this one grand orb of light, a light that loves us unconditionally, without judgment, has no need or want for the stories, only wants us to love ourselves. I then spent the next very difficult 7 years attempting through bruised knees and egos and, all of the bloody, messy, very human ways we learn. I spent the next 7 years really learning how to do that for myself. And this is something that I will openly talk about. Yeah, many of my NDE friends have an issue talking with it because audiences don't react well to it. Those of you who know me or have heard me speak before on any platform, my commitment to myself was always this. When I first started listening to NDE stories, I didn't often see where I was at on my own on stage. I saw the shiny, beautiful, love and light, all is healed, all is God. And those things are beautiful. And that's what the culture's thirsty for. But when I was 2 years into it and I was suicidal and I was wondering if something was wrong with me and how I could spend time with all this beautiful light and knew there was a purpose and a mission to all this, why then was I in this dark, deep, awful pit of despair? And as I began to know other NDEers, and I lost 3 friends in 1 month, I kid you not, August of 2019, I lost 2018, excuse me, they're correcting me, 2018. I lost 3 friends in a month, the month of August, to suicide. And they were all NDEers. And they were all going through this very real thing that nobody was talking about. And it was when I landed at that IANDS conference in 2018, and I was starting to come out of that haze of 2010 to 2018, and something had pulled me to the conference. I had gone in 2012, as I indicated earlier, I had sought out NDE communities, but then my after effects couldn't handle it. I didn't know how to ground myself. I didn't know how to bring all of the light that I'm capable of receiving all the way down into the physical. And so a lot of the times my heart chakra here wide open, but I'm basically floating. You have to imagine a little girl who dissociated from her body from the time she was 11 to about 18. When you start to realize you can stay out here as much as you want, it becomes really hard to be in here. And I see this all the time with my work now. I have a private international healing practice, and I chose that month that my friends all chose to transition out. I chose to take the painful part of the NDE and make that part of my healing mission. Maybe I wasn't going to be a clinical psychologist anymore, but I could take those skill sets. I could take that language. I could take my knowing of nomenclature, and I could make sure that other persons who were going through mystical, radically transformative experiences had a place to land. That someone who could actually deduce and discern the difference between what's true nomenclature and what's really just an adjustment disorder period of integration, which is normative with any type of spiritually transformative experience. I could offer that to persons. And in order to do it, I didn't understand it at the time, but my angelics, they had guided me on a sort of mystical boot camp from the time I got back, because every time I would get into one of my, this is too much, I don't want to see all this, make it stop. And you learn very quickly when you have these gifts, as anyone that's psychic or highly intuitive from childhood knows, if you lower the vibration of the human body, the animal itself, you turn off some of the gifts. So if your pineal gland's wide open and you're around people who normalize something like, say, alcohol, then all you need to know is that you can go out and on Taco Tuesdays, when everyone's having their margaritas, you can have a night where you don't have to see all that crap, just have a few margaritas, right? Now, no judgment on anyone that drinks margaritas whatsoever, but for me, that wasn't a good trend. That was taking me back to an old kind of behavior, an old kind of being, and it cut me off from my higher selves and my spiritual gifts. Yet I had that period of those 7 years where I kind of danced through it. And then in about 2018, I started having all these things happen in my personal life. I've now gone on that spiritual boot camp, which was as these periods of turning my gifts on and off, this not knowing of where to go, I start just doing what you always need to do, which is just being very clear. I want help, Spirit. I need help for this or that. I want this kind of help, or make me of service, which was my initial prayer as an NDE. I said, I do not want to do. Spirit, make me of service. And step by step, they really guided me to a shaman, an indigenous shaman, who really taught me about grounding, who could see the gifts on me, who knew without me saying a word that I had been born with asthma, suffered much as a child, who explained that there are certain physical pathways and diseases that are actually called shamanic initiations. And the closer you come to death, and the more often, the higher the initiation, who could see and ground my pineal gland. He was one of many. And from my openness to work with him, other people stepped forward. When we get to my friends crossing over in 2018, I'm very upset. I am a devout supporter of IANDS. I was speaking at their next conference, yet I have acknowledged this, and they've done great gains, and you all are doing great gains by being here. Yet at the time, there was no talk about trauma. There was no talk about the shadow. There was very little on integration. And that particular conference, so many of the people that are my closest friends now, I walked up to them and I said, I'm going to talk about all the things no one's talking about. Because the title of the conference was After Effects, and no one talked about suicidality, depression, or post-traumatic stress disorder in relationship to integration. And so that became my doorway. That became my portal to how do I introduce myself to the NDE community? What do I have to offer? In 2019, I was very blessed insofar as I had done the root work. I had started speaking locally to trauma survivors, and then I decided I would show up at a local IANDS chapter, excuse me. I would tell my story once, I would get it out of my system, because again, at that point, 10 years, that's the first I'm telling it publicly ever. And then I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm done. I've told the story. I'm going to move on. I never thought I'd be here with you all sharing this. And it's been such a gift, all the things I didn't expect. But that said, the pandemic then begins. NDE videos begin to skyrocket and go all over the place. Talks I thought no one would ever see go into the masses. And from that, I have the grace of NDEers from around the world suddenly reaching out to me. It was wild. My mom, in the same house, I was working on the website in 2019, and my mom's like, "You're walking away from a Palo Alto education to do this. No one knows who you are." And I'm all like, my angels just keep saying, if I build it and talk, it will all kind of unfold. And you have to understand, people think I'm very extroverted because I do these. I'm actually painfully an ambivert. If we were in a room together and I did not know you, I would be like on the wall, just like quiet. I have to get to know people. I have to be passionate about what I'm talking about. I never expected to be talking to people around the world and speaking publicly all the time. But why I do it is because of the service to the souls that I know are coming in for many of these experiences and just don't have the privilege, the education, the support, or maybe the trust in their higher selves and on the ground network. And that's where we lose people. 7% of NDEers will commit suicide in those first 7 years. 21% of childhood experiencers will complete it. Those are statistics from my friend PMH Atwater, yet I have told her personally, I would love to see the current numbers. Those statistics from a clinical perspective are highly outdated. She's still writing books. I think she's on her 49th or something wild, but those statistics are old. And right now, no one's doing that research. So if it's of interest to anyone, I invite you to that. I've been attempting to connect with as many persons as possible that are in the research aspect to offer my feedback, and I participate in any research I can assist with. But it's super important that we tell the poetic cosmic kiss side of the story, but also the very hard and holy human aspect of the story, because the awakening is just the beginning. It's the radical embodiment that is the journey. We are here to learn how to embody that light. Anyone can say they know they're of that light, but how do you pull it down in and through you? How do you radiate it? How do you share it? How do you transmit it when you can't see the light in your own environment, when you can't feel it in your own soul? And I cannot tell you how many times when I was painfully depressed and dealing with very real post-traumatic stress disorder in those early years, wanting my after effects to go away, not wanting to know everyone's stuff. I mean, you have to imagine, we're talking about entities and stuff too, like walking down the street and just passing someone and they've got all these hijackers and you don't know how to protect your field yet, so you pick it up. I mean, that's another part. Like when you're an oracle or a channel, if you don't know how to protect your space, or if you go online and you share, but you don't know how to put up energetic boundaries and protect every time you go up, you pull things in. And so the 7 years I really spent in that suffering, that pain, they became medicinal in the here and now. Because now when NDEers come in to work with me, I'm able to tap into what's current in the energy field, what's showing up. What does it have to say? What is its intelligence? All emotions, all energies have intelligence. The reason that they stick with us and that they dominate us and that we become in service to them, just like the mind, emotions are the same way. The mind is a terrible, terrible master, but it is the greatest ally and servant you could ever have, as evidenced by how I was able to co-heal through the art of belief and faith. Yet at the same time, emotions behave this way. If we allow ourselves, as in my case, to suppress inflammatory emotions, what may happen? Well, in my case, it was very literal. The lungs, which in Chinese medicine are the epicenter of grief, failed, and they began failing in childhood. The kidneys, which hold water, heavily are emotional, and are known to be correlated to fear, they failed. And the liver, perhaps the one most damaged by what I'd been through, because there was never a healthy outlet for rage. And when you go through traumatic abuse for years and then you're called a liar for a decade after, there is a tremendous amount of righteous rage. All of those things purified through coma, but many of them took me the next almost decade to truly heal. Now, I tell my story in service as our world is awakening. There are countless persons wakening up that will have after effects, for lack of better terms. In my full truth, I do not believe these are after effects. Yes, from an NDE perspective, they fit the literature very much. However, with me, and like with my intuitive eldest son, and with many of you, these were inborn gifts I had as a child. Coma recalibrated me in that light. It gave me a higher energy, which I can tap into and bring back down here. Yet those things were organic to me. Everybody has a pineal gland. Everybody has the capacity for these gifts. In the coming years, as things shift more and more, I have no crystal ball. I do not know what that will look like. But eventually, as they shift, we will see that more and more people who are choosing to come into the higher frequency of the light body, which is just the culmination of the 5 subtle bodies, but bringing it down into embodiment, that will begin to change the frequency of this entire world. And from that change, many, 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 many more people are going to be activated. So for me, sharing these stories, talking about transpersonal peak experiences and how they can revolutionize us, how they can shift our entire trajectory. I am a completely different person than the would have been doctor you would have met in 2010. Even in 2018, when I began contemplating talking, even in 2019, I was much more clinical. I still had ties to that identity. Those have dissolved. As the world awakens more and more, it is an invitation to come into our power. And we are all flowers. We all have a different frequency. We have a different beauty. We have a different scent. Some have thorns, some don't, but all of those flowers are unconditionally loved as they are. When we start to allow ourselves to be as we are, and we love it all, even if the mind quantifies it as good, bad, ugly, this, that, even in that space, and especially in that space, meet those emotions, meet those energies, meet those people as beloveds, because they're all aspects of the self. Anything that's irritating us about anything or anyone else, as Carl Jung astutely said, is a reflection on some part of us that we have yet to meet. The shadow, for me, was really an invitation to start talking about my NDE. Had I not been locked in the Shadowlands for such a long time, had I not felt there were people talking intimately about the shadows, and by the love of all light, there are many people talking about it now. And that's amazing. I give so much gratitude to people that are sharing the totality of their stories. Since 2020, this world has radically shifted. And with it, the awakening stories are shifting. So if yours or your friends or the books you read sounds different, thank you to all of those stories, because we are like colors of the rainbow. We are all meant to have our own hue, and each and every one is holy and to be celebrated. And my work now is to just really share that medicine through storytelling, through energy transmissions, but most importantly, through the one-on-one work I do with my clients and my children as they're bringers of this awakening world and the new generations that are going to really be in alignment with light. So with that, I really want to wrap my storytelling up and open it up all to you. I am open and comfortable with any question. If miraculously there's something that crosses the line, I'll let you know, but I really enjoy questions and answers. And thank you for allowing me to give you a deep dive, because I rarely get to go into all that detail.
Wow. That was amazing, Brooke.
Thank you.
Can we do this every week? Because we're just scratching the surface now.
I know. Well, you said go deep with the NDE, so I was like, I'll expand.
No, that was wonderful. I'll ask one question, then open it up to the group. Just one thing that occurred to me was, I've always been fascinated by NDEers who come back miraculously healed, Anita Morjani and others. And it sounds like you actually did and they describe sometimes working with energy workers like Natalie Sudman, the one who blown up in Iraq. But it sounds like you did this work with the light beings, the energy healers after you were back. And that, I'm curious about that. It sounds like within 2 or 3 weeks, most of what had plagued you for a decade was cleared up. Is that true, or can you comment on that?
It is. I mean, of course, when we're in this plane, there's always duality, and that's what we're here to learn from. I do believe that they relieved a lot of the brain trauma while I was in coma. I believe a lot of what I felt when I was in the presence of the creator. In fact, I know I'm getting corrected right now. I know that a lot, they don't like that term believe. They're always like, no, no, it's no, you know. Belief is like a mental thing. There in the higher planes, it's like wisdom and instantaneous knowing. That said, I do know that they were holding me and they were healing a lot of that at that time. Yet again, because I didn't know I was being initiated down this pathway and to help others in this particular cohort, experiencers and whatnot, I didn't understand that so much of what I was learning through them was what I would later do with others. I just at the time was like, wow, this is taking forever, but it all became part of the service. So yes, I think it's very interesting that some people, they come back that way. I don't know if I came back totally healed, if I would be able to go to the depth I can go with people now. Because I know the pivots and the intensity of like the ping pong effect when you've known the transcendent, but your nervous system puts you back at trauma. It's just this like intensity that I needed to live it out in my central nervous system to truly be present with someone else in it and not become clinical or doctor-like. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I guess a follow-up. So it sounds like you work, maybe not primarily, but a lot with people who have had mystical experiences or NDEs, and you're helping them integrate. Is that a lot of what your work is?
It's about, in the beginning, it was all of the work because I didn't think I was going to get a lot of people. I mean, I thought it was like a niche, like I'll just start and see where it goes and maybe do clinical work on the side. But as soon as I started sharing online, there was this instantaneous response from people that had been looking, and so that became kind of the focus in the beginning. Now what I'm seeing a lot of is, we're in this period of plant medicine coming through to assist with a lot of mental health stuff. And interestingly, when I was doing my doctorate, we were already studying that in 2010 because it was already evident we were going down that pathway with research. However, while we were studying it from a clinical perspective then, nobody was really looking at the container of how you do the therapy, how they work with the astral body, how you integrate that, and then how you heal and seal it and send them back out for integration. So a lot of people come to me now because they've gone on like these ayahuasca journeys or they've done mushrooms, but they didn't do it in the right environment. And instead of helping, it's causing harm. And that's not me saying anything negative about plant medicine because it's quite beautiful when used with reverence, but all of us have to know our limitations and we need to be in healing containers for that type of ceremony to be advantageous. So I have those, and then I get intuitive children. I've spoken a lot, and you probably can deduce from my language that nomenclature and diagnosis had a big part to do with how I got here. In addition, why I walked away from clinical psychology is they were really forcing at that phase that we diagnose someone right away and that, it's all part of their record. And I started having a distaste for those kind of labels. And so I've spoken out a lot about that. And this wonderful group of my clients that I now see are what a lot of people term like intuitive children or rainbow children or starseed children. They're just really intuitive kids who come in neurodivergent. And the parents don't want to medicate and they don't want to turn off the gifts. So I work with them in how to support the mental health, but stay away from allopathic treatment.
Yeah,
fascinating. So those 3
fascinating.
groups, yes.
You mentioned something about intuitive son as if there was a story there. Is there any more about that you wanted to share?
I'll give you a little one that's related to what I shared. There's so many stories. when he gets a little bit older and I'm comfortable with it, he might tell some stories. And he did present with me in 2019 at the IANDS, which when it was virtual, PMH Atwater and a couple other people that were on a panel with me, we had him come out and talk about being an intuitive child with this community, which was kind of fun. But basically, I knew he was highly intuitive. The minute he came out, I had a very traumatic birth experience. Part of the trauma they wanted me to re-experience as I, learned of these gifts and how to work with them. But when they pulled him and handed him to me, the first thing I noted was this indigo aura. And it made me speechless because I had never seen an aura in a child that young. Most of you that have these gifts may know that it's very atypical to see like a solid aura in one color on a child. They're developing their aura, okay? And even on adults, I never see it. I see a dominant hue, but it's always it's moving. There's all sorts of things and other fields interplaying with it. And in his case, it was this beautiful indigo, and I knew I had been an intuitive child, and I had prayed when I was going through all of the abuse and stuff to have another intuitive in the house, someone that would understand me, someone that would love me, someone that would be an artist, someone that would just be in resonance with me. And I'd always thought that it was because I was praying in this wrong way or whatever when I was wounded that I didn't get that prayer answered. And when he was handed to me, here he was, and that color was like an intuitive aha moment of my prayers have been answered. And yet, having been indoctrinated by Catholicism from the time in a Sicilian family, I didn't want to do that to my children when I had the miracle of being able to have two healthy boys. And so I didn't want to tell him what I believed and force it on him. They know what I believe, but not force it and not make him do certain types of practices and, align to my beliefs. I wanted him to be an individual. And yet, I always told my friends, this guy is highly intuitive. I'm pretty sure he was a teacher in another life. I gave him a Sanskrit name because I had this whole feeling of knowing him somehow through the Himalayas. And that said, when he was 3 and I was saying a prayer, I was clearing his bedroom with Metatron before he went to sleep. And he didn't yet know that that was a ritual of mine every night before we enter the dream time. But all of a sudden he said, "Mama, can you come pray with me?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I sit down on his bed. And before we begin our night blessing, he looks at me and he goes, "I'm glad you chose me." I go, "Chose you when?" He goes, "In space where all the other stars were brighter, but you stayed with me. You stayed with me for a moment. And now we're here." And I mean, I couldn't believe it when he did that. But then when he was 6, 2 funny things I'll get to very briefly, but I just want to illustrate these because this is how tapped in the current generation of intuitive kids are. He calls me, and this was the 2019, the same pivotal year that I'm speaking at IANDS for the first time, which was a big deal to someone who was shy and held all this in the beginning. He calls me right before I'm about to go on a stage and he's freaking out. He's just starting kindergarten. He goes, Mama, I can't go in that classroom. I'm like, "Why?" And he goes, her aura is so dirty. The whole place is filthy. And I'm all like, "Oh, he's being dramatic. I'm not gonna, so I hear him, but then I'm trying to redirect him to going, and I've got to go clear and ground to get on stage. I cut home. I get there. I want to meet the teacher, whatever. I meet this lady. She's the most cantankerous person who does not like children. And the minute I see her, I'm like, he's right. Her aura does dilute the whole room. So at that point, I was like, his discernment's really good and he hasn't taught anything. But I think the most pivotal moment was in 2020 when school was canceled. And I had to go tell a first grader why school was suddenly canceled at the same time as Dad and I were divorcing, okay, which happened before. And I didn't want to tell him those things in tandem, but I was so emotional and I knew it was going to come out from other people. So it just kind of intuitively came through, and I trust spirit when it's like that. Well, I get ready to tell him what's happening with the pandemic. And he goes, "Stop." He goes, "Mama, I know. No reason to worry. My teams are calling it the great undoing. Everything that doesn't work will die and collapse. And that's why we're here, because we're going to build it all new." And
Wow.
behind him. And I was like, what? But it was also this grace from spirit that if he's receiving and intuiting and not interpreting, and that's the beauty of the younger generations, I want to point out, my brain gets in my way. I still to this day have to tell my wondrous brain that it doesn't need to interpret. Just receive and allow, and what needs to be interpreted, it will happen in the moment through co-creation with spirit. But with these younger kids, they don't even try to interpret. There's just this trust. And so now that he's 11 and his gifts are still intact and he trusts them, for a child who started shutting down hers at 3 and they were gone by 13, it's a very beautiful gift from spirit. And the testiment's on him. He's done the work. So thank him for being here.
That's a wonderful illustration. Thank you. I'll stop now and open it up to others. There's bound to be other questions.
Okay, great. Anybody?
I know Laura will come in here in a minute.
Okay.
I will. Okay, so I do have a question, and thank you for sharing all that. That was high energy and intense, and you must be exhausted.
I will be later.
But the one thing that you said that really struck me is, and you said it quickly in passing, but you were describing the entity, that everything is light in some kind of form, and that the entity that was there was, I can't remember your exact words, but you know, this pure love. But the phrase you used was, and it only wants us to love ourselves. It wants one thing, for us to love ourselves. And that struck me as just so huge and so difficult. And I wondered if you had any tips, any hint, any instructions or advice or guidance that you might have received on how do we do that?
Well, it's a constant practice. I feel that part of why spirit has guided me to personally share like this way and over again is to illustrate that point. If I were able to spend an hour just on after effects, the thesis you would hear is that over and over again, I sabotaged myself because I had this unconditional love and compassion for everyone else, but I refused to give it to myself. I refused to believe that old schema of she's bad, she's broken, she's an addict, she's this, she's all the labels that have been put on me, even this taste of the divine. And this is what led me to really start speaking. So thank you for focusing in on that. I could not give that love to myself. No matter how many times I'd have spiritually transformative experiences, and I did in that 7 years. It was like there was hell, but there were also ecstasy states. Okay. But it was like a pinball. I, for whatever reason, could not get past the limiting belief of that. And so that's when personally, and I invite clients to do this different ways, but for me, because the core self was so fragmented, instead of shaming or pushing away those aspects of self, I started giving them names and identities. I go, that's Rebel. She loves the self-sabotage because she knows it gets your attention, you know? And that's so, and what ended up happening is from that, through spirit, and this was their direction, and it's very aligned to the Hawaiian philosophy of medicine and the Lemurian, if you want to get into that. But basically, really applying, I love this aspect of myself. Like, I love this Rebel. She's saved me. She kept me here, or whatever. And then I also forgive her because there's the aspect of me not enjoying her company. And I am grateful for her. And those emotions, for whatever reason, I believe they're part of that indigenous philosophy because they're part of our own Holy Trinity within. If we can love even the wounds, if we can love the pain, and that's why shadow work is so fundamental to truly loving yourself. If we can forgive it, however it's showing up, without story, without where's it going, without agenda, just simply, okay, I was that, okay, I am that, okay, I have those parts, okay. And then be grateful, because again, I wouldn't be here talking to you if I hadn't developed gratitude for each and one of those parts that I shamed and stigmatized and pathologized. So it's this holy trinity of, you know, it's almost like when they come together, self-love automatically radiates in the center. Love, forgiveness, gratitude. And it's not just for ourselves. We have to constantly be doing it for the other. And that's why I joked, I even call like things I don't like beloved, because if it's infuriating me, I need to respond to it with even more love. I need to have even more forgiveness. I need to have even more gratitude. But in order to really achieve that energetically, and this is my bias, but I'm owning it, we have to drop out of the mind. We have to love from here. We have to forgive from here. We have to be grateful from here. And I'll take it one step further. If you're a female in this culture, you have to drop it into the womb, because that connects you to your own blood, your own femininity, but also your lineage. And so when you're healing that, so many of the programs and the stigmas and the mental debris that's running the show, it's coming from the ancestral line. It's coming from traumas in the genes. Okay. And which is why we see multi-generational transmission over and over and over again. So every time I get triggered or activated, and I always say this to clients too, instead of seeing it as an annoyance, start to lower the threshold where you truly can treat it like an invitation, because you will start to see that that trigger is a holy messenger. That shame is a holy messenger. Shame wants nothing more than to be loved. If instead of telling shame it's ugly and it's unworthy and it's gross and it's disgusting, we can meet it with love, shame dissolves. And that's how they all kind of work. But why it's so difficult, and you bring up this brilliant point, I made it sound succinct, but it's really the work of all of us. You know, a lot of times people want NDEers to give them some profound mission or purpose or why am I here? At its core, Spirit always says this over and over when I'm working with persons. Your job is to love unconditionally. Self, others, world. It doesn't matter how you do it. The path is your gift. What's getting activated in what makes you come alive, what enlivens you. That's the path. But the service, the root that ties you back to that divine light, to the creator, to God, is unconditional love. But it will be absolutely inauthentic. And the Buddha was spot on in this, as was Yeshua or Jesus, that it must be reflected back to the self. You know, you become a beacon of that light when you begin to do it for yourself. And I've been very open in the NDE community. And that's part of why I like doing these events, because it gives me an opportunity to bring in the medicine of the here and now versus the stories of the past all the time. I've been very open that I've struggled with this. When I first started speaking about my NDE, I didn't expect anyone to see those videos. I thought I would get it out of my system and it would be gone. And then 2020 happens and suddenly little tiny videos are getting 40,000 views in a day. And like, you're getting blasted with all this energy from people. I thought I understood energetic boundaries. I thought I was in a place of unconditionality with myself. That attention that I didn't expect taught me about the shame that was still in me. It taught me about the toxicity and where I'm not meeting myself with love. It taught me about how my body will still inflame. And again, had you asked me during those years, particularly like 2021, 2023, as I was still integrating that, would I have called it medicine? No, but there was a higher knowing it was in service. And that's what I want to invite you when it becomes so hard, when the belief feels so rigid and so firm, it's usually because we're meeting it with that same constriction. If I'm giving off an energy to anything of this won't shift, this can't be fixed, this can't heal, well, I'm giving it power. And so that's really the dance, the invitation from Spirit. If Spirit loves us unconditionally beyond what we've been taught, beyond what we've been told, then all the constriction is coming from here. And so really that elevator down into here, and then really working with love, forgiveness, gratitude. And I would say for me, because again, the mind was so powerful, and also those of us that are aligned to being empaths, finding a way to make the pain of service. So you don't have to hold it up. Like for me, that was paramount, like talking about it and being around other people in it, yet sharing authentically, that's medicinal. So much of the constriction is because we're inside waging a war on ourselves that feels infinite. and only we know about it, but we're meeting it over and over again. That's exhausting. So just really soothing and softening and allowing yourself to feel what you feel. And I know it's so simple in vernacular, but it is so, so hard and holy and miraculous when we do it.
Well, believe it or not, I understood every word of that.
Oh, good.
That was great.
Good. Anyone else?
Yeah, what other questions?
Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome. Very similar experiences, just getting out of the head, getting
Yes.
out of the condemnation, using the mind in service instead of being imprisoned.
Mhm.
Brooke,
Julie.
I've got a question for you in terms of your communications with beings and your insights. The world is on several courses of self-destruction right now.
Mhm.
What is the forecast? Do they share that with you?
What is the forecast? Well, my bias, and I always like to own my bias because again, I'm perfectly imperfectly human like you all, and there is that aspect of us that's the brain that's still operating at all times while we're here. So my bias is that there is no black or white right now. From what I've always received from spirit, from the way they've always communicated to me, from the way they mostly communicate, which is light in rooms with frequencies and vibrations and knowings. There's so many ways this could play out because everything's quantum. Okay, meaning there's multitudes of timelines and potentialities that can play out. What I will say is this: so much of my journey and so much of what I'm encountering in the world as I speak now in different communities that are awakening is our energy and our frequency and what we give to it. I know it's really dark and really nasty and really divisive, but unfortunately, if we give our energy to kind of going in either of those directions, we become some of what we're sampling, okay? The art now is really learning how to be in it, but not of it, how to make conscious choices and shift the narrative, but not get stuck in the muddy, dark pools, if that makes sense. I'm not in any way advocating to give your power away or disengage, but there are certain things people do, like watching the news over and over or listening to certain people talk over and over, that is bringing you down into that frequency. If the masses stay at that frequency, you've already said it. It's self-destruction. It's obliteration. Okay. However, those of us that are able to raise ourselves into a more heart-centered environment and go beyond, every indication I've gotten from the light beings, who, by the way, if there's one deep message of hope in what I'm saying right now, are here more than they've ever been. I've been able to see them as an adult for over 13 years now, and the amount of light coming in, the different levels of higher dimensions, higher angelics coming in from all over the place, it's unprecedented. So though it looks very dark down here in the physical realm, there's a potentiality that we all tap into that light. That light can communicate to us when we're more open. It can't get in when we're drowning in that muddy darkness that so many people want us to get stuck in right now. Okay, so it's really like conscious discernment and really maintaining that if you're going to go play in those waters, you then clear yourself off and you still meet everything at the frequency of love. And that's the hardest part of these times. How do you meet all of this disgust, this rage, this violence with love? That is the hard and holy work of this particular time that we're in. But again, from a heart space and from what spirit showed and what they've showed countless other intuitives that I deeply trust, we have the great potential to go well beyond this. Unfortunately, in shamanic terms, this is the death process. We are in a cultural near-death experience, but we're in the dying part, and dying sucks.
Interesting.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow.
I have a question. Do you have anything to say about people with autism? Because to me, they are so amazing and gifted, even though they don't all present that way. but I just feel like there's something about, I don't know.
No,
Wait.
there's definitely other types of intelligence. Like, yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting segue from the last question because, yes, I absolutely, to answer simplistically, yes, I do believe that there's a higher intelligence to how they present, to their gifts, and I do call them gifts. And that's why I was saying how I don't like to label neurodivergent children. If it's to get programs and whatever, I'm all for that. But to call an individual a diagnosis or whatever, that's very dangerous to me. I was very blessed personally in that I worked with neurodivergent children on the spectrum. That was my whole clinical training when I was an MFT and beyond. And so it gave me an intimacy. I worked with kids, some of which I worked in the last place for 3 years. They never spoke. Okay, so 3 years of being in relationship with someone and learning how to use nonverbal communication and whatnot. So I absolutely agree with you that there is a very high intelligence that comes with it. However, there's a deficit in the social skills and other areas, which is why it's been labeled nomenclature at this time and point. But there are other aspects of neurodivergent traits like ADD or ADHD that we see the similar thing. There's an absence in the ability to pay attention, but then there's an increase in the creative abilities, much as there may be with autism or Asperger's syndrome. So absolutely, I feel that the danger of nomenclature, and please hear me out, nomenclature, had they not been there putting PIC lines into my brain and intubating me, they saved my life. They also nearly killed me, but they also saved my life. And I have this foundation where I will always respect allopathy. And if my children are in a grave medical situation, we'll go there. But our choice is always to be more natural and in alignment with more of a light medicine or holistic medicine, frequency medicine. But you're absolutely right. There are so many forms of intelligence, like intuitive intelligence is a perfect example. So much of intuitive intelligence has been pathologized throughout history. You're crazy if you're intuitive. Many intuitives have made themselves crazy, trying not to be highly sensitive and intuitive and fit into the mainstream world. What we're about to see as more people get more authentic with their intrinsic gifts, as more people come out of the closet as both intuitives and or neurodivergent and or whatever else they might self-identify with, the labels are going to become less important. It's how we relate to each other, how we co-create this love frequency, and we really evolve to operate in unity. The problem is now we start out separated. And we all have that separation wound. And then we spend the rest of our lifetime separating more and more and more, wondering why we feel so separate. So it's really coming back to that source. And in the case of your beautiful question, it's looking beyond the label. When a kid comes to me, I'm never going to read their file. I always tell people that send me books when they send me session requests. I don't want to know all that. I want to meet you. They'll give me the information. And from there, the history will come up when it's in resonance to the here and now, because we're all carrying outdated stories. And if we allow those stories to be the co-authors, we'll never change the narrative. And that's what we're seeing right now in what's going on in the world. We're trying to respond with outdated systems and they're failing. That's an invitation. That's an invitation. And yeah, it might be brutal and it might be messy, just like dying, just like losing a spouse, just like going through a divorce, just like any disease. And yet, if it weren't for these opportunities in this lower density of 3D, 4D that we're in, many or most would not evolve. And so we're given these, and I feel even this, when I was in psychology, everyone was like, oh, they're autistic, oh, they're bipolar. We were calling regular people that. It lost its meaning when we start doing that. And truthfully, those labels were there to assist us in understanding each other as individuals. It wasn't to separate us. And so we have to start collectively moving beyond that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Good.
Yeah. Anybody else? These are good questions.
Yeah. So you just mentioned we need this lower density to evolve. So this experience we call life, you feel is pretty valuable as far as what evolution or evolution and understanding this love?
Well, this will probably rumple some feathers with some persons, but I'm
All
just going
right.
to say it because it's been my experience. Earth is not unique. I mean, there are life forms and other things out there. And what I mean by is we need it to evolve. Our consciousness needs it to evolve. I don't know if it will be in another incarnation as, you know, another animal that we don't even know, or if we'd be human-like in some other place. But the soul in the space that I was in, I've described it so many times to people. If you've done a lot of journeying through the realms or through the inner planes, you start to notice, like when you go from 12D or beyond, as some say, the changes in what you'll receive in these different vibrations and frequencies. For me, I was blasted beyond the soul star up into the, you know, the higher chakras. And I had an experience of kind of ebbing and flowing through those places. Okay. We can call them heaven. Certainly that's how they felt. You know, we might say other dimensions. I don't know. But the reality was there was an intense knowing of humanity was A, not alone, and we were B, yet not unique in our struggles, meaning that all of consciousness seems to be here with the program from Creator God, from, you know, whatever you want to call it, Prime God, Creator God, Father God, Mother God, from that to seek all these different types of experiences for one purpose. And that was really to continually evolve. We're not, for everything I see over and over again on people's fields, it's not punishment. Because we are taught to kind of really operate from here and we cut this off, and most people don't even know how to be in the lower body, like truly embodied from a heart center place. We see it as punishment. Even the word karma, I mean, most people think of that as punishment, but really a karma, when it's showing up, it's heavy, it's thick, it's dense, but it's an invitation to transmute it so you may walk in dharma, purpose, your light, your power. And that seems to be what this earth walk is about. We all come in with our unique gifts. We all come in with our unique deficits, and every opportunity is an invitation to change those, to play up a bit if you want, but each time it's for the collective. When you up level, I up level, and on and on and on. And that really seems to be why Spirit is here and illuminating so many people here and now. I mean, I see my mom, when she joked about no one would pay me for my job right now, I was shocked because there was part of me that believed her. And so I had it in my mind, no clinical psychologist will come see me, no medical doctor, like I'm going to be over here in woo-woo corner and I'll just get comfortable. Well, interestingly now, over half of my practice are clinical psychologists and doctors who are starting to wake up to the fact that what they've been doing isn't accounting for the whole. And they want to start to understand how to bring in the subtle bodies, the energetic field, the mind part of the brain. And that's a really beautiful thing because it's showing you that this divide that the media and news and politics are perpetuating isn't quite as nasty on some levels as we think. A lot of it we're co-creating because we're emphasizing what's not in alignment versus looking at things that might be. And so again, it's really important what we give our power, our energy, and our choices to. The light always seeks light. You can tell with the darkness when you're in it because it only wants to seek out darkness. It's comfortable with darkness. Pain understands pain. Some part of us is all traumatized. Some part of us is all wounded. And that part has the mental narrative of it's not going to get better. It's not going to shift it. Woe is me. And it goes into a victim consciousness thing. When you feel yourself going into victim consciousness or like this is all hopeless, that's the invitation to right there pause and just be with the hopelessness and what is making me feel hopeless. And from there, pivot. Because if you don't question it and you give your power to it, you're going to choose things that align it. That's why frequency is truly the medicine of the future. Just so many people haven't realized how simple it is because we've used all these new age terms to kind of make it feel harder than it is. And we're also not talking enough about again, the Trinity, so many things in Trinity. Frequency, alignment, and intention. Those are the things that really change your outcomes. It's not just, I'm going to manifest this. No, I want to manifest a kinder world. I'm in alignment to manifesting a kinder world through service. And then my intention is to be of service, and your frequency radiates from that place, and you just keep going from there. If you always combine those three things and you pivot when you're not in alignment, you pivot when your frequency is off, you pivot when all of a sudden you don't feel your intention, then you will find ways to bounce back. But if you don't do that, that's where we get in trouble, because again, the human, the 3D, the density, it likes darkness. It's comfortable there because there's currently more of it. We have to choose the light. And for now, so many of you are that light. It is really your medicine to spread it to others in this world, which is in such crisis and really needs that medicine and really needs your faith and your inspiration and your Christ consciousness coming from your heart. Hope that makes sense. They're very chatty today. So
They're talking to me because I've felt so down and discouraged, and I'm stuck in that spot. So this has been very helpful to hear this as a pivot point.
it's tough. And I would also, for the highly sensitive, because I know in this group, there's really simple things you can do. Like in front of my computer right now, I have a selenite wand because it just brushes off like lower stuff. It's a purifying crystal. I keep tiny little pieces of that in my purse, in my kids' backpacks. Like anytime I'm like, oh, that energy was funky, I'm just waving it around. I used to hide and do this. Now I don't care. I used to think it was way too out there. Now I'm just doing it everywhere. And then there's simple things like you can have sprays. I always recommend to everyone just using simple rose water. You can get it really cheap at like Trader Joe's or whatever, but rose is the highest frequency. If you tend to be around people that are low vibrational or doing a lot of things you're not in alignment to, carry a small thing of rose oil or rose water. Oil is very expensive, so I recommend the water. And then you're just spraying around your crown. Always let it start and kind of descend down. But any place you feel the tension, you can just spread it. And then of course, the most economical of the purifiers is water, salt baths, going into the shower, really asking Creator to bless you with that white light and devour it all. Super, super simple. But the more you can keep your energy clear right now, the more you can set boundaries when you're in environments where you can't avoid politics or you can't avoid the news. You can let the other people talk about it. That's what I've been doing here is, okay, that's your opinion. Okay, you talk about it, but you set the boundary. I'm not going to talk about that. Everything is, what am I giving my energy to? Okay, because anything you give it to, you become part of. And I feel that that's what Creator really wants us to understand. If I'm preaching love and I'm not loving myself, then how is that accurate? If I'm preaching love, but I'm not loving my neighbor because of their politics, then how is that accurate? Constantly the invitation over and over and over again. So, yeah.
I got it all written down. That was just brilliant.
Awesome. Glad it resonates.
Thank you so much, Brooke. We're at 9 o'clock. Anybody else want to jump in, or shall we let
I
her?
have one quick question if we have a moment more.
Sure.
Yes.
There have been many, many dark periods in human history. I'm hearing from you that your sense is that this is a different inflection point. Am I reading that correctly?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. Like basically it was, and again, I really, it's very hard to put in vernacular without, they're like lighting up in the corner, like go slowly here, Brooke. Because I was moving so fast because they were moving so fast. I don't want to align myself to any teams or ways of being that might black or white what I'm about to say. Okay. But truthfully, what was kind of shown to me and countless others, and what continues to come through the field, was this was all humanity's necessary learning curve. Like none of it was accidental, none of it, like every ounce of suffering. And I hear this, and I really want this to land with you all, because it's not unique to me. Everyone that's really doing the work, all of the difficulties have been part of the treasure chest. If you really show up to this divine assignment that we have now and you choose love, you will open what one of my great teachers calls God's playbox. You will get to see all of the beautiful treasures that have always been here. And humanity, there was a lot of things that consciously shut us down, a lot of things that were permanently put in place. And we co-created it by amplifying it. And now finally, you know, it tried to dissolve many, many times, and we resurrected it. Now it's become so global and so compacted, and you have eons of pain coming up from the surface with a collective, not just one country or a few, that can't take anymore. Now, I have no way of knowing which way that goes, but I know their outcome is light. And that light, in my experience of it, even in my darkest days of despair, will always overwhelm the darkness. It's why the darkness seeks out the most illuminated persons, because it needs it to survive and it tries to push it out. But the truth is my now 11-year-old, when I taught him how to clear his bedroom, he was all like, well, if the darkness knows you're not scared of it, the darkness has no power. So, and like, absolutely, if you do not fear it, and that's really the invitation of these times, if you align to fear, you cannot fully align to love. So it's really allowing ourselves to, again, use the mastery of your higher self. Don't listen to this. Don't listen to the history books. Don't listen to whatever you've been told. Allow yourself to know that the most potent co-creator is up in here and pours right down into here. And if you pause this and drop here, you've got a direct line and you can talk anytime you want. And from that place, all is well. And that light, once it starts coming through here, we're like Care Bears. We can just go out and blast everybody with it. And that's, for better or worse, I like to use levity, even in the gravity of what's happening now. We are meant to be here in joy and bliss and play, and to enjoy this experience. We have the opportunity now to change humanity into something enjoyable. And maybe it won't be my generation or even my sons, but the reality is the blueprint's already unfolding. So really allowing yourself to come into that resonance. And in order to come into that resonance, you have to begin to purge all the interference. And that's the hard work. That's the work everyone wants to bypass. They want to go up here. But this is where the medicine is. This is where we help others. This is where we uplift. This is where we resonate to another person's pain. So it's super important to be open, to be illuminated through heart, but to also be deeply tapped in to the human. Because without that, we can't change this. We still need to be grounded.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, that was
So
great.
welcome.
Thank you so much, Brooke.
Welcome.
A thought that struck me, I would love to get some feedback that I'll collect and send to Brooke, because I just thought that was outstanding. And Brooke, I'm wondering, is it all right if we have any questions that hit us after this to reach out to you? Or
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. My website is www.brooke with an E, Grove, Grove, healing.com. There's a contact page in there. So if